Karl Marx is a political philosopher and co-developer of communist theory, a political system facilitating the public ownership of the means of production in which citizens are paid according to their abilities and needs. Marx's ideas were greatly influenced by the rise of mechanization, and so they are especially relevant in the modern world as technology exponentially advances. To appreciate their contemporary importance, it is important to know the context upon which they were founded, and so we must know the author. Marx was born in Prussia in 1818 to a moderately wealthy middle-class family. His mother was from a family of very wealthy industrialists. In fact, her family would go on to start the multi-billion-dollar Philips Electronics company. It is important to note how prominent industry already was in Prussia. Even Marx's family had industrial backgrounds. Marx's father was a lawyer and a man of the Enlightenment, with great interest in philosophy from the likes of Voltaire and Kant, so Marx's upbringing would play a big role in his future interests. Marx later went to a high school with very ideologically liberal faculty. The school was actually raided by the government, and it was found that politically liberal literature was being distributed amongst the students. It is quite likely that this was the very beginning of Marx's leftist ideals. Marx would go on to cultivate these ideas in university. Here he met and joined a group called the Young Hegelians, a group of leftists who studied and discussed Hegel's philosophy. Hegel's dialectics would later play a huge role in developing dialectical materialism, the basis of communism. Hegelian dialectics is an inquiry into two opposing metaphysical concepts, like good and evil. Dialectical materialism is an inquiry into opposing material interests, like the interests of industrial property owners versus those of workers. In 1844, Marx met a man who would essentially shape him as the philosopher we know today. His name was Friedrich Engels, and it is impossible to discuss Marx without discussing Engels. Friedrich Engels was the son of a wealthy cotton textile industrialist, and in 1841 he had moved to Manchester, where he spent 3 years researching the working class. Engels had seen the horrors and arguably the worst sides of industry: the mass unemployment, poverty, poor working and living conditions, child labor, and gross mistreatment of workers. By 1844, he had compiled his research into a book, and after meeting Marx, Engels had convinced him that workers would be the agents of a grand socialist revolution that would reconstruct the foundations of property rights and nationalize the means of production. Together, Marx and Engels later wrote the Manifesto of the Communist Party, outlining the historical foundations of communism. The authors argued that though class distinctions had always existed, they had become much clearer in recent history. Mechanization devalued workers and increased revenue, thus creating the wealthiest class of capitalists to ever exist. As disparity increases, so does class consciousness, and a revolution becomes inevitable. Communism would replace current governments. Marx and Engels died before the 20th century, and arguably to this day their predictions haven't been realized. Many think Russia was the first communist state, and although Marx's works had massive influence on revolutionaries and their initial goals, the public never really owned the means of production in Soviet Russia, and they were not paid according to their abilities and needs. Millions weren't paid at all, and these countries are not communist. Their oligarchies or autocrats simply hold or grant monopolies over all industry. But this does not mean that Marx's ideas are useless to us. They are still very much relevant. It's important to know about Marx's life and influences to understand this relevance. Marx was the product of a time when advances in technology greatly devalued or unemployed millions of workers around the world while greatly richening industrialists. Communism was a way to eliminate this income inequality. In our time, technology advances significantly faster than it did in the 1800s, and just like in Marx's time, our current economic systems are vastly underprepared for the disparity mechanization will create and has already created. At least in the 1800s, people could still get jobs operating the machines, but with increasing technological autonomy, there will soon be no jobs in operating machines. That doesn't mean we should overthrow our government to attain equality. That really hasn't gone too well in the past. And communism also has its own flaws. But communist or leftist principles may be the only way to overcome current and future disparity. The shift towards communism can even take the form of higher corporate tax. Taxes are essentially societal shares in companies. In order to impose any significant law to decrease income inequality, it will take a global effort. Since companies just leave when met with profit-diminishing restrictions, no government would risk such harm to their economy alone. But without any measures, disparity will only increase. So now more than ever, we must remember those iconic words: workers of the world, unite.